It's so nice to be back here with the Crestwood Historical Society. Great group. I welcome all my colleagues, and I hope you enjoyed today's show. What my intention is to weave a story about an industry that put Tuckahoe and Eastchester on the map. The marble quarries basically took Eastchester and Tuckahoe from farming communities, and it put us into the industrial age. There are many topics that need to be covered, so I'm going to try to talk as quick as I can. But we're going to talk a little bit about the land that the quarries are on, a few quarry notables, the quarry locations, and then we have some great vintage photographs of the marble quarries and all the associated buildings. We're going to go into marble quarry workers and the buildings that were constructed with Tuckahoe marble. It's so impressive when you see the buildings, you're going to see this came out of Tuckahoe. It's absolutely amazing. And then we'll just touch on the downturn of the industry and the beverage industry. When we get started with the program, the Long Reach was what Eastchester was called about in 1700. It's important to understand the Long Reach from a geographical, geological, and strategic standpoint. In 1700, a deed was signed with the Native Americans for the land that the quarries are on. The Mohegan Indians were the predominant tribe in the area, and they owned all of the Long Reach. The Long Reach was the property, again, that Eastchester is on. The map that we're looking at right now shows the Long Reach. All of this was Eastchester. It's bordered by the Bronx River, the Hutchinson River, the Scarsdale border, and the Bronx. Just so you could orient yourself with the map, what I'm highlighting right now is where Tuckahoe is located. This little road that I'm highlighting is Main Street, and it goes up to the Ward House. It's the one thing with Eastchester today is totally landlocked. But back then, Eastchester went all the way down to Eastchester Creek in the Bronx. This is at the southern port of the Hutchinson River. What was very important with this aspect is that it gave us navigable waters that we can transport the marble. Where the Long Reach is in relation to its communities surrounding, Eastchester is this little location right here in the center, and we have access to the water at Eastchester Creek that's being highlighted. This map is an 1893 map, and what I'm highlighting right now is Marbledale Road, and this is where the quarries are located. Back in the 1820s, the marble would come out of the quarries, and with oxen and drays or heavy wooden carts, the marble would be transported down the Post Road all the way to Eastchester Creek to be transported. But there's more to just the land and its access to the water. The Long Reach is also in a geographical location that's very, very important. When I was doing the research on the Long Reach and Tuckahoe marble, they said Tuckahoe marble also had another name. It was called Inwood marble. And that got my curiosity. So I went in and I started doing an investigation into Inwood marble. And what it is, here's it. The map that we're looking at is an 1843 geological map. And the land between the northern Manhattan all the way up to Mid-Westchester, it was called the Inwood Formation of the Manhattan Prong. What it was primarily rock with a lot of limestone and marble. The marble right here is the largest quarry. And what I'm highlighting right now is the Long Reach or Eastchester. To blow it up right here where the dark spot is, that's where Tuckahoe is and the marble quarries. It's also the largest deposit of marble. Marble quarries weren't just located in Tuckahoe. They were also in Hastings, Ossining, Thornwood, but the purest, the strongest of the marbles came from the Tuckahoe quarries. This marble was pure white, and the strength of the marble was the highest around. Even if you went to Vermont marble was very good, but there was no access with railroads or the sea. So that marble really never got utilized until later on. So it gave Tuckahoe a chance to really get the ball rolling in the marble industry. The next photo, before I get to the next photo, I'm highlighting the Scarsdale border. I just want to show where the marble is located in relation to the Scarsdale border. And now I'll show the quarries. This is a composite map that we have at Village Hall. It shows the marble quarries on an 1870 map. And then we have a 2012 map. And we overlaid the quarry so you could see what it looks like today, where the quarries would have been, and then what it looked like back in the 1870s. Now, early on, when we got the deed for the Long Reach, Edmund Ward, the father of Stephen Ward, the patriot, who owned the Ward House up in 22, he got a piece of property for purchasing the land for the town of Eastchester. This is a similar map, but it's rotated. Here's the Scarsdale border. Edmund Ward, for purchasing the Long Reach, the town of Eastchester gave him a piece of property of his choice. Where he picked was Savinoy Country Club, I think it's Bronxville Manor, and a little bit of Tuckahoe going down to Marbledale Road. So this was all Ward's property. When he died, his two sons split the property, and the patriot, Stephen Ward, had the western portion of the property that abutted the Marbledale Road. Later on, Stephen Ward passes on, and his son Jonathan takes over the property. He doesn't want to have anything to do with the marble industry, but his property was laden with marble outcroppings. So Jonathan Ward eventually sold the property down by Marbledale Road. And let me just show you what the marble outcroppings look like. This was Stephen Ward's property and then his son Jonathan Ward's property. And you could see the marble outcroppings sticking out of the ground. It's not really good farming land, which was a big thing back then. But they could test the marble, and the marble was graded for strength and quality. One interesting fact with marble, when marble sticks out of the ground, it's almost like if you're looking at an iceberg. An iceberg has a small piece that sticks out of the water. The main bulk of it is underwater. And the marble is basically the same way. If you have marble outcroppings, you know you're going to have a sizable amount of marble below ground that you can work and quarry. Here's another marble outcropping. So they knew that the marble was there. Jonathan Ward sold some of the property to quarry people named James Mockery and Francis Kane. Two gentlemen that were very important to the marble industry was one gentleman was Abijah Morgan and the other was Alexander Masterton. When the quarry started, James Mockery and Francis Kane bought the property from Jonathan Ward, and they got the marble quarry started. This is the southernmost quarry down by Jackson Avenue on Marbledale Road. Even though they got the quarry started, it started off very slow. So this gentleman, Abijah Morgan, prominent resident, farmer, businessman in the town of Eastchester, purchased James Mockery's shares of the business and really accelerated the pace that the marble industry started moving. One of Abijah Morgan's biggest purchases of marble was Alexander Masterton. Alexander Masterton was born in Fofar, Scotland. He was a trained stone cutter, immigrated to the U.S., and at a very young age started a business, Masterton and Smith. It was a construction business in New York City. He was also one of the biggest purchasers of Tuckahoe marble and really helped to accelerate even more the marble industry. In the 1830s, Alexander Masterton negotiated a $3 million contract with the U.S. government to help rebuild Washington, D.C. after the War of 1812. I found it very hard to believe that it took 20 years to really start to rebuild Washington, D.C. And Tuckahoe marble was used extensively. Tuckahoe marble was used even to build the east and west wing of the U.S. Capitol. And later on in the program, we'll see all the buildings that were done. Alexander Masterton had a home on White Plains Road. And the one thing unique with his house was the walls were all insulated with marble chips and marble dust. It is the first home in the country that was insulated in that manner. Marble quarries lasted well over 100 years. The industry lasted well over 100 years. over 100 years, a lot of quarries were developed, abandoned, revived, merged, worked under different ownerships and operations. One thing that really spurred on the use of marble was the Greek Revival architecture. This required marble, and it really spurred the industry. Another thing that was very vogue at the time with architects was using the white Tuckahoe marble. And they would put the white marble on the facade of the buildings just to brighten it up, and it looked great. Where was all of this occurring? Mostly along Broadway in New York City. And that's where New York or Broadway got the name the Great White Way. A lot of buildings were built with the white Tuckahoe marble, and it was just fashionable to do the facades. The marble industry grew in the decades before and after the Civil War, employing 300 to 500 stone cutters and quarrymen. We even had President Martin Van Buren pay a visit to the quarries and spend the night at the Ward House on Post Road. The quarries were very labor intensive, but in the 1840s, steam power really accelerated the quarrying. Quarry work was very seasonable. Most of the workers at the time were Irish, Scottish. There were German workers. They all immigrated and worked the quarries in the early years. In the later 1800s, the Italian immigrants came. If you look in books on the marble industry, there's so many names. This is just a partial list of all the quarries over well over 100 years where the names changed, quarries were bought, sold. So there were very many quarries. Here we are back to this map. It shows the Hall and Masterton quarry. This is the southernmost quarry. Then we have the Young quarry on Fisher. We have the Stewart quarry. This is up near Leawood Golf Course. And the Bates quarry, where the baseball field is today, near the Scarsdale border. On this illustrative map, it's a 1923 map, but I wanted to give you an idea of where the quarries were located in relation to, let's say, Village Hall. Right now, I'm highlighting Village Hall and the Depot Square. Here's Main Street, Columbus Avenue. And if you took Columbus Avenue, went to Circuit, Lime Kiln Road, right on Marbledale Road is where all the quarries, well, the Masterton quarry was located. And it extended quite a distance. We have the Young quarry on Fisher. That's located right here. But the interesting thing with this map is here's the railroad. The railroad reached Tuckahoe in 1844. As soon as it reached Tuckahoe, the quarries got in talks with the railroad to build a spur and have the spur go to Marbledale Road. So this is where we have a road called Lime Kiln Spur. So railroad tracks were put here and went to the quarry to pick up the pieces. Let me go back one. Okay. To show the railroad a little clearer, I have this 1910 map. Here's the railroad. It's coming from New York, going up the White Plains. When it reached Tuckahoe, they built a spur, and the spur would continue right to Marbledale Road. You had the lime kilns, you had the crushers, and the mill building. And what does a spur look like? Here's the spur. This is way before urban renewal. The railroad is behind the fence going from White Plains to New York. The train would come up, get off the main line, and go to Marbledale Road. The photographs we're going to look at show the quarries and show the buildings. We're very lucky to have them. There are not many photographs of the working quarry. Here we are on Marbledale Road. Marbledale Road is right here. It goes in back of this building, continues to the right going north. In the background to the right, you could see the quarry. The little building right here, this becomes Shiloh Baptist. Shiloh Baptist purchased this building. I forget the exact date, but they've expanded and made it a lot bigger. The building that I'm highlighting is the Waddleton Furniture Company. This company made high-class furniture for the wealthy in New York City. If we go just north of this building on Marbledale Road, you can see the quarry off to the right. They had huge timber cranes to pick up the marble pieces from in the quarry. In the center, you could see the mill buildings, finishing buildings, and the steam coming out of the kiln and crushers. If at the time of this photo, you could stand on the ridge just to the north of the quarry. If you stood on top of this ridge and looked down into the quarry looking south, this is what the working quarry would look like. You can see the cranes in the background. We even got some men down here. What they were doing, they have carts that would be lifted and they could transport the marble to the different buildings, the kiln buildings, the crushers. So the men would fill up these carts and the crane would lift it up so they could transport the marble. This quarry here is they call it the Marble-like Quarry. This is originally the Morgan and Kane Quarry. The quarry is being highlighted right now. This is just one of the associated buildings, but what I want you to notice is Marbledale Road goes across the screen. The road going up the hill is Jackson Avenue going up towards Waverly Square. You could even look in the background, and what I'm highlighting right now is the Immaculate Conception Church. You could see it from the quarry. An interesting thing, people wonder how they transported the marble. Back in the 1820s, 1830s, we didn't have trains. We had carts called drays and oxen. And here's how they transported the marble. They would get the slabs. The slabs would be sheared off the walls in the quarry. The crane would lift it, and the marble would be transported, pulled by oxen, and the oxen would go up to the post road and travel 5 miles on the post road to Eastchester Creek. My God, what a slow process. It's amazing. I've been trying to find how many drays and oxen would be working at the same time going up the post road. Now we come back to my photograph of the route that the drays went. They would cart that slab of marble, and those slabs of marble varied from 2 tons to 20 tons. So it was very laborious. So here they are. The dray would come down Post Road, go to East Chester Creek, and at East Chester Creek, it would drop off the marble. The marble could be cut into smaller pieces, and the marble would be stored. They had cranes. The cranes would pick up the pieces of marble, and it would be lowered onto schooners, barges, and this way they could transport the marble to the different job sites. One of the biggest job sites, of course, was in New York City. So all they had to go was down the East River to Manhattan and drop off the marble. But the ships would also go up and down the East Coast. Tuckahoe marble was used in Boston, South Carolina, Washington, D.C. So it gave them an opportunity to transport the marble. In 1844, the train made it to New York. Here's a steam engine train, and the train would back the cars up onto this railroad spur and go to Marbledale Road. Here's a view inside the quarry. It's hard to believe this is on Marbledale Road. Some of these quarries went down well over 100 feet. Eventually, it got down to groundwater, so that was the limiting factor of how deep the quarry went. You could see all the natural seams that are intrinsic in the marble. What the workers would do is get up on top of a flat sheet of marble. They would drill holes a certain distance from the face. After they would drill the holes, they would put in chisels. Marble has a characteristic, it's called a natural cleavage plane. So if you keep striking a hammer, it would shear the marble apart and the marble would come down in a sheet. So if the holes were 2 feet from the face, a 2-foot wide sheet would come down. So they were able to control the marble. The building down at the bottom, it's basically a workshop. They would have drawings, what size marble pieces they needed, and then the workers would get the marble. Here's another picture showing a working quarry. And here you could see some men down at the bottom of the quarry. It was a rough job. You had to climb ladders. I wouldn't be surprised if the crane would pick the men up, but a lot of ladders to get up and down in the quarry. But this picture really doesn't show the magnitude of the marble. Here's a view. Here's the natural seam. These seams, it's part of the formation of the marble. They're built right in. You can see the size, the workers, the size of the sheets, and all they would do is go up on top of the sheet, hammer, shear off a piece, and that would be lifted to the surface where it could be worked. As big as these sheets of marble, here's even a more impressive sheet. It's hard to believe that the marble was of such a magnitude. In this photo, what's interesting is you could see railroad track. They had pieces of track laid inside the quarry. What they would do is when they would shear off a piece of marble, they could put it on these carts, wheel it, so it could be under a crane at the surface. And this way they didn't need as many cranes. They could move the pieces around and get it to the surface to be worked for the construction requirements. Here's one of the buildings. Now we're at the surface of the quarry. These are the working buildings. We have mill buildings, polishing buildings, cutting buildings. In the back, we see some of the stacks. The stacks were for the kilns, and the kilns would heat up the pieces of marble before it would go into the crusher, and the crusher would basically crush it into a powder. They could make gravel with the chips. The powdered marble was used for the construction industry. When you make cement, you need lime. Marble is a limestone, so they would use the lime and mix that with cement. The marble chips were used for road beds, and the marble chips would be mixed with tar to make macadam. Another industry that used the marble dust was the beverage industry. They would use it to make carbonation, and I'll show you how they made that later. Here's just another photo with the associated buildings, powerhouse, crusher, and kiln. Here's an active photo. Here's the railroad cars. The spur that we saw going from the railroad, the New York Harlem River train line. Here's the railroad spur that would go to Marbledale Road. In the back of the train is the quarry. Cars like this would pick up barrels of marble dust, marble chips to be transferred to the beverage industry and construction industry. Here we have a mill building and the kiln and crusher in the background. To make the picture a little clearer, I'm just going to go back. The photo we just saw is taking place right here. Now, the train was right on the tracks, right at this point. Behind it was the quarry, and we have the mill building. And if we go back, here's the train, the quarry behind it, the mill building, and the kiln and crusher. Again, here are the buildings in the quarry. This is all on Marbledale Road. This shows the cutting and polishing rooms where the marble slabs would be cut and finished for specific jobs. You can see all the pieces of marble. These were extracted from the quarry. And in this photo, you could see the timber screw cranes. They were located all over to transfer the marble to the different buildings. Here's a piece that looks like it's about 2 feet thick. And we have maybe 1 foot thick piece below it. If you look along here, they scored it. They could drill, hammer, and it would shear right through. And this one sheet would become 2 sheets of marble. They put timbers between the pieces so the crane could put a sling under it and pick the pieces up. Again, here's a gentleman. Here's the railroad spur going to Marbledale Road, and the crane and the quarry is behind it. Now, I was speaking with a gentleman before the show started. He's from a family with the marble industry. Here are the finished pieces that were made in Tuckahoe. They're making column segments, capitals, pieces like this. They look like they're sills for the window, and they're made with the marble. These sheets look like they were used for the facade of buildings. Before they would transfer the marble, they had to make sure that the marble fit properly. So what they would do is they would stack all the pieces, make sure the height, make sure everything fits the way it's supposed to, looks the way it's supposed to. Then they would dismantle it, put it into train cars, and then they would transfer it to the site. At the end of the marble industry, probably in the 1930s, the quarries were starting to fill up with water. Their use was minimal. It was used mostly for decorative work, for mausoleums, for gravestones. We were just donated a marble mantle, fireplace mantle with Tuckahoe marble. It's absolutely gorgeous. It weighs a ton. So the marble industry on a smaller scale kept going well into the 60s. Just another quarry. You can see all the marble that's still left. And that marble was, a lot of it was salvaged. Now we're going to look at the marble workers. Again, 300 to 500 work. Oh, excuse me. They employed 300 to 500 stone cutters and quarrymen. Scottish were mostly the skilled stone cutters and shapers. Primarily Irish and German were unskilled quarrymen, and the Italian immigrants didn't arrive and really get started in the business until about the 1880s. Here are some of the skilled stone cutters, and you could tell that they were the important people. They're out there with ties, jackets, and vests, but they were the artisans. You could see the mallets that they used to shape the marble. They also had chisels to make the ornamental decorations on it. These gentlemen were paid considerably more than general laborers. Here's a whole team of workers, everything from the skilled workers to the laborers. This looks like coffee break, but this is a great photo. Now, let's take a look at what was built with Tuckahoe marble. I mentioned they used the white marble to face buildings on Broadway, and given Broadway the name the Great White Way. Before marble buildings, they were constructed mostly of wood, brick, granite, stone. Many public buildings were built based on the Greek Revival architecture. The Greek Revival architecture, they say Greek Revival, but it's a combination of Greek, Roman, and Egyptian. We sort of melded everything together and made it our own. Tuckahoe marble was very dense. It was weatherproof, fireproof. Again, marble fragments that they would take out of the quarry were crushed for powder, used to make lime for the construction industry, crushed into gravel, mixed with tar to make macadam. Good quality marble was used for the beverage industry. The biggest user of Tuckahoe marble was the US government. Here's an example of Greek revival, the Parthenon. It showed harmony, balance, and projected strength, and that's what the government wanted here in our country. Here's the United States Custom House on Wall Street. Again, if you look at the Custom House, look at the architecture. Let's go back. The difference is 2,500 years. The Parthenon was built 2,500 years ago, and now we're making buildings to simulate it. Here's the United States Custom House in South Carolina. This photo, you could see it's under construction. Construction actually stopped at this time. We had the Civil War going on. As soon as the Civil War ended, they finished the Custom House. Here's the New Orleans City Hall. Still the classical Greek Revival architecture. The United States Capitol used Tuckahoe marble to build the east and west wing. This was after the War of 1812. So it took 20 years, and they started fixing the buildings with the Tuckahoe marble. Tuckahoe marble was also used in the Washington Monument. They used marble from other sites, but Tuckahoe marble was used in the construction. Borough City Hall, Borough Hall. It was done, again, in the classical Greek Revival architecture. As you look at the photos, just think all this marble came out of Tuckahoe. It's still mind-boggling that this much quantity was here. Here's a great picture of the Borough Hall. Tuckahoe marble was used in the New York Metropolitan Museum. Again, they still simulate the Greek Revival architecture. This, I think, is one of the crowning projects of Tuckahoe marble. It was used for St. Patrick's Cathedral. Again, the marble was very dense, very weather resistant, and it was the perfect choice for St. Patrick's Cathedral. Here we are closer to home on Main Street. We have the Samuel Fee Building or Washington Hotel. The building housed quarrymen back in the late 1800s, and the third floor was used for stonecutter union meetings. We had the Marble Schoolhouse, not one of the bigger projects, but it's still a great building. If you've ever been to Rhode Island, the Newport, to see the mansions, here's Marble House. Marble House is absolutely gorgeous. The whole exterior is Tuckahoe marble. The interior is all Italian marble. And if you go inside, the Italian marble has such beautiful colors. It's a fabulous building. Tuckahoe marble was used in the New York Public Library, the Union Baptist Church in New Rochelle, the Mutual Life Insurance Building in New York City. This is from 1868. So here's the Stuart Marble Palace. A.T. Stewart was the owner of one of the quarries on Marbledale Road. He was also an entrepreneur and built one of the first major department stores in New York City on Broadway. And this was part of the Great White Way. You could just picture all the buildings with white Tuckahoe marble facades and the white marble palace. A.T. Stewart lived in Eastchester. He lived on Boston Post Road, right across from Eastchester High School. If you're an old timer, this was called Apple Annie's at one time. No, it's the United States Naval Observatory was made with Tuckahoe marble. Here's the Hotel Vendome in Boston. It's a shame this building doesn't still exist. It's this was beautiful. Even in Washington Square Arch, this is all Tuckahoe marble. You could see the beautiful work that was done on this. It was a beautiful example of Tuckahoe marble. The Immaculate Conception Church was built with Tuckahoe marble, and it was built with Tuckahoe labor. The residents in Tuckahoe and Eastchester put the Immaculate Conception together. That was in 1912. In Tuckahoe, the Assumption Church was built with Tuckahoe marble and also with Tuckahoe volunteer laborers to put it together. One of the last projects that were major projects that were done with Tuckahoe marble was Soldier Field in Chicago. When you look at these three sections of Soldier Field, this was all done with Tuckahoe marble. And here we are again with the columns, the Greek Revival architecture. So that was one of the last projects, major projects that were done. What was part of the reason for the downturn? Changing architectural preferences. The Greek Revival architecture was changing. The styles were changing. New construction materials in lieu of marble were made available. Additionally, access to remote marble quarries started to flood the market with marble. A lot of marble came from Vermont. Now they had railroads going up to the Vermont area that they could transfer the marble. And more prevalent use of structural steel. Earlier, I talked about the marble dust. This actually was a tremendous industry. What they would do, well, this was called the Colorado soda fountain. This was a gentleman, let's see, I got his name, John Matthews, made this in 1832. But what they would do is, in the lower bin, they would mix sulfuric acid with the pulverized marble dust or lime dust, and they would make carbonic acid. That's an aqueous form of CO2. And what it really boils down to, they made carbonation by mixing sulfuric acid and lime dust. And that would filter through water, go up into the chamber, and make carbonated water that they add flavors to. And that was the beginning of the beverage industry. Who would ever think that lime dust and sulfuric acid? I wouldn't drink it. But it was an actual industry. And that concludes today's show.